Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be back here. Governor, Senior Deputy Governor, thank you. You've made a number of warnings over the last few years. So I think about, you warned about inflation, you warned about immigration, you warned about productivity, a very keynote speech, but you also made a warning in the spring about financial speculators purchasing government debt, about 40% if I recall correctly. And I guess the question I have is, in a world where we are very interconnected and the possibility exists of a sovereign debt issue somewhere else in the world, maybe not in Canada, are we not more exposed than we would be because we have 40% of, we'll call them hedge funds, purchasing our debt, which rely on this kind of liquidity and repo market to make the system work? And I think that was the conclusion of the report, that that's a rising risk. Is that fair?
Yes, it is a vulnerability which we've highlighted. It's certainly not unique to Canada. One thing you have seen actually in most major economies is there's been generally a rise in sovereign debts globally. There's also been a shift in the investor base. And as you mentioned, hedge funds have come in to the government debt market in a bigger way. And look, to some extent, that's welcome. Governments need investors. They've been an important new investor class. But what is concerning about it is they invest with a lot of leverage. So what they do effectively is they use these arbitrage strategies that have fairly low returns. To juice those returns, they borrow a lot to increase the return. And
so I want to jump in right there because I have very limited time. If something happens and those investors leave the market, what would happen to bond yields, government bond yields in Canada?
As you suggest, if that funding was disturbed, a lot of it is very short term. If that funding was disturbed, they pulled back sharply. Yes, that would cause a disruption in government bond markets. That is very core to the financial system. That could certainly spill over
so that would be
issues.
Increased bond yields, correct?
Yes.
Potentially. So is it prudent for a government, knowing that this risk exists, to borrow record amounts of debt to go to the bond markets year after year, knowing that this risk is rising?
Look, I mean, as I said, this shift in the investor base is something you're seeing in all countries. You can. I'll let you decide.
I'll just ask another question and put a different way. If a government borrowed less money in the bond markets, would that be less risk to the government? Okay. I also want to ask about term structure. We're told the government's making generational long-term investments. The term structure of government debt is some of the lowest in the G7. Let's set aside the U.S. Mexico is an 18 average year. Heck, the government of Ontario is 12. The federal government's 6.9 years. Shouldn't they be actually matching borrowing with their investments if that's actually what they're doing?
Okay, well, now you're really getting into some pretty complicated. So debt strategy. So there's a few different things. So obviously, on average, at the shorter end, it's less costly. So you want some at the shorter end. The longer end is more stable, so you want some at the longer end. The other thing is...
But I guess I'm just asking, like, we have a low term structure. Like, shouldn't the government be borrowing more long term?
I mean, the government determines the term structure that balances these various things. We are the agent for the government.
I understand you won't want to answer. That's okay. I have one final question. I understand the bank may be close to not losing money anymore, but do you wish you still had some gold reserves to offset those losses? Because we do not have any gold reserves anymore as of 2016. You can blame a predecessor. You weren't there. So do you wish you still had the gold?
we you know,
In
we
10
hold
seconds
our
or less, please.
we hold
Governor.
our reserves in interest-bearing assets, high quality.
It would be
US,
worth a
euros.
lot, though, today, though. Well, I mean, we're one of the only central banks that have zero reserves now.
Okay, thank you. That concludes this
Sorry.
round.
Funding a lot of debt being borrowed. If the Canadian government runs into issues, yields spike up, or there's problem with funding, would you consider using quantitative easing as a tool again?
Quantitative easing is not a tool that you would use for something like that. I mean, quantitative easing is a tool, first of all, you'd only use in extremely, we've only used it once in the history of the country, as you well know, during a 100-year pandemic. And it's really something you would use when you've got interest rates at zero. You feel that you need a lot more monetary policy.
If you were trying to
stimulus.
keep interest rates down, though, and there was an issue with funding and interest rates were going up.
I mean, we have a whole series of tools we can use.
I'm glad to hear that you're very reticent
Thank
to
you
use
both.
quantitative
We're
easing
going to
again.
move
Thank
on to the
you,
next
Governor. I
round.
appreciate
We have a
Chambers,
series of
Mr.
tools.
Macklem, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, this is interesting. We can see that we have a great deal of debt here in Canada. What concerns me is the fact that we need to create wealth and the fact that foreign investors are no longer coming to Canada. You've said that we have to improve infrastructure. We have to better transport corridors between the east and the west, better port infrastructure. But what can we do to attract them? You've talked about this. You've said foreign investors have to come to Canada. How can we attract them here if we don't change anything with their regulations? Because investors always say that it's too lengthy, and that's why they look elsewhere. I agree with you. This is one factor. I've often heard that myself when I've talked with international investors. So yes, our reputation in Canada is that we have a regulatory system with the government, with the provinces. It's complicated. There's lots of uncertainties. So if we do want to have more foreign investment, I think we want to obtain this foreign investment, then it is important to improve this aspect. But even if we have harmonization with provinces, if we don't change anything with the regulations, is this actually possible? Permitting and so on. There are good reasons for having regulations in place. But yes, I think this is an important question. Can we remove regulations that are not meeting a need anymore? Or often there's duplication, says Mr. Martel. Or can we have quicker reviews? These are things that need to be explored to improve foreign investment. If we look at the interprovincial obstacles, would this actually be favourable for investments between provinces? Because there would need to be political will. There needs to be leadership from the government. But when it comes to the municipalities and provinces, I don't know if they'd want to accept common regulations. So how are we going to get this? Seems that we're kind of maxed out, because if the money doesn't come in, how are we going to actually see any light at the end of this tunnel? When it comes to different regulations between provinces and trade barriers between provinces, the good news here is that recently we've seen lots of interaction between provinces on this very matter. There are several MOUs that have been signed between provinces, but to be frank, if the aim is to reduce costs for businesses, then it's important for provinces to take a more comprehensive global approach. because have lots of different MOUs between different provinces, well, for businesses, they still have work to do to try and decide and determine what they can do and what they cannot do. So I'm rather concerned that they've made good progress, but they're not there yet. And I'm concerned that they're going to say that, yes, they've been successful when actually there's still work to be done.